students. I am super excited to have a dear friend and fellow trainer, Jennifer, with us. She is not in Colorado. I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself, where she's from, her background, whether she wants to divulge education or her career right now. I'm going to let her kick it off with you before we dive into the subject of risk.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. A little bit about me. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in accounting from Arizona State University. I've been in that audit space for almost 15 years now. I started with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then for the last 9.5 years or so have been doing local government auditing. So, and then something interesting. I got to do an inventory inside a rocket ship when I was with PwC. So that's kind of
okay. That's the most fun inventory I've heard. I'm pretty sure my inventory experience was climbing to the top of a silo and looking in to see like how much grain there was. I think I did some rail cars too, but okay, you've got me beat with rocket ship for sure.
That was a pretty cool experience, I'll have to admit.
That's awesome. Well, we're talking all about risks today. And just so you all know, Jennifer actually does this a lot in her role right now. She actually trains the managers or kind of mid-level supervisors. She'll explain more at her company or government about what risks are. So she, I think, is the perfect person to explain in her words, what is a risk? And because this isn't a term that we tend to use a lot. So Jennifer, I'll let you take it away and explain how you do it.
So as Joe mentioned, I do some training here within my organization. I'm the internal controls program manager for the city of Peoria in Arizona. And part of my role is to help our managers and supervisors and our department directors understand what internal audit does, what internal controls are, and part of that we have to start with, well, what is risk? Because as an auditor, we base our projects off of where risk exists. So I like to keep it really simple because I think that tends to stick with people a little bit better. So to me, a risk is any place where something could go wrong. Like I keep it that simple, where we could have a loss of some kind. I think we're going to talk about the different types of risks in a little bit, so I won't spoil that, but looking out for places that things could go wrong.
Perfect. I mean, that's such a good way to just keep it simple, right? This doesn't have to be such a complicated thing. I think people get really scared when they hear this. It's almost like biz speak, right? This term risk.
In the training, we also talk about the difference between risk and what an auditor looks for and risk management, because we have a risk management department. And so a lot of people get very confused with how those are different. So that's another thing we discuss too.
Absolutely. So that's a great point. And to point out to students that this is specifically, we're just going to talk about the idea of a risk here. And then later, you're going to have a module on enterprise risk management, where we talk to a couple different professionals on that topic. So that's completely different. So good idea to point that out. And then Jennifer is going to come back for another module and talk about how internal audit does risk assessments themselves. So we use this word a lot. And so keep in mind that this is really just the one word that we're talking about. And so I guess let's go into, how do you help people identify where risks are? So I know we know it's where we could lose something, or something could go wrong. Is there a process that you have that you would help them to identify where they are?
Yes. And again, I like to keep things very simple. That's just kind of, my way of going about it. And I think the best way to do that is to ask questions. I spend a lot of time doing a risk assessment at the project level, just sitting down and talking to people, getting an understanding of what they do and why they do things, if there are regulatory requirements for why they're doing it, if there are policies and procedures in place that kind of tell them they have to do things a certain way. So I think asking questions is the best way to identify risk, and you just you have to have that hat on where you're looking for answers that make you go, oh, well, what could go wrong? So asking those questions, I think, is a good way to do it.
Yeah, I love that. I recently heard an analogy of, okay, what if you were going to drive across the country? Let's talk about that. What could go wrong, throughout that whole process. And so I like your idea of just taking that one topic or objective. That's really where this starts, right? What's the objective or the purpose of whatever task you're doing? And then asking what could go wrong with that? What could go wrong with that? And that's kind of digging deeper. It's almost like the 5 whys.
I was gonna say like a kid, right? When you
Yes.
start to ask them and they're like, but why is it that way? How do you know that or whatever? So
That's
yeah.
right. Actually, one of the videos that they'll watch in this class is a guy actually explains risks based on how does the chicken cross the road. So
Yeah.
I'll leave that right there. But there's very simple ways to think about this, right?
Yep.
So let's jump into the different types of risk that are out there. What are the types or the categories of risks that you see? And that might vary by industry, right? So kind of explain those different types to us.
It definitely varies by industry. I've had the opportunity to obviously been in the space arena, aerospace and defense, local government, they're all very different. But I kind of group them into 6 categories. So strategic risk is a big one, right? What is going to stop an organization from achieving their objectives? And then legal risk is another one that I oftentimes talk about, what laws and regulations are in place. Compliance risk is another kind of similar to legal, but a little bit different. Operational efficiency and effectiveness come into mind when I think of that one. Financial, of course, we have financial auditors at companies, and we have them too here in local government. And then reputational, that's a huge one for us in local government. The public is trusting you with their managing their money and programs that they use every day. So making sure that we are doing everything we can be doing to maintain a good reputation with them is very important. And the same thing goes for companies too. They have stockholders and things like that they are responsible to. So I kind of group them in those 6 categories for the most part. And sometimes I could even argue that they're all strategic, right? Because if any of those, if you have a problem with any of those, it's going to potentially prevent you from achieving your objectives.
Yeah, I like those. I mean, those are, to me, perfect 6 high-level risk categories. You could break any of those down further. And I want to make sure that, the students know that, and this, like I come from financial services, insurance background. And so you could take financial risk and you could have mortality risk for insurance. What's the death rate going to be? You could have liquidity risk. All different types of, even inflation risk today, right? Interest rate risk. So, I think those are perfect from a high level. And just so the students know, you can break those down so much further. And in today's world, I don't know where you would put like people risk, maybe under even, reputational, or I see a lot of companies with like HR type people risks, but you depending on the industry, obviously, or the organization, you could have various categories is the point there.
Yeah. And they all kind of, in some way or another, nest under each other at
Yes.
At one point. So
yeah, like IT risks, right? I mean, that's kind of a whole nother bucket, but IT risk could go under, operations. Operational. So absolutely. We could probably talk about the different types and categories forever, but just really wanting the students to know that there can be very high level or as low as you want when it comes to risks.
Right.
And so you kind of mentioned this, and I'm, just going off topic a little bit, but you do a lot of project planning and put together and identify the risks when you're going in to do a project or an engagement. What does that process look like just at an engagement level?
It's messy. So it starts out with those very high level questions. What does your organization, or in most cases, in my case, it's department. What does your department do? Why do they do it? Who are they looking to serve, right? And then how do you do it? And you're kind of breaking it down question by question, layer by layer, and asking about things that could interfere with that. So trying to catalog all of those things can be challenging for sure. And we try to group things that are similar in nature, I tend to do it in those 6 buckets that I talked about before, just for consistency and my own sanity, to be honest. But yeah, I think that starting at the top and 30,000-foot level and just kind of.
Yeah, and I like that,
Using
using the categories to guide you in your questions. I think that's real helpful because then you won't miss one, you know, potentially, or you hope you won't miss one as you're having those conversations. And you mentioned catalog. So, you know, I know you probably use something similar to like a risk control matrix or something like that. And that gets us into what we're going to talk with you about in the next module, which is controls that we put in place to mitigate these risks.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go too far into that, but I just wanted to mention, I know typically we use some sort of spreadsheet, right, to catalog those different risks.
Excel is my best friend.
Yeah, right, the RCM, right? Like that's what we do. Any other thoughts before we close out this kind of risk interview and move on to controls, for students to understand about risks or to help them not be daunted by this topic?
I honestly, I think the best piece of advice is to not be afraid to ask questions and just listen for the things that you think could go wrong. And if you're concerned, if you kind of listen to your little red flags to go up, that's usually a pretty good indication that that there's a risk there of some sort. And it might take you a few questions to get to the root of it, but I think asking good questions is just about the best way to do it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to leave the students with one other. I found it to be like, I don't know, one of those like golden questions that you find in your career. What keeps you up at night? Yep. Right? It's such a good thing.
A classic one.
So if it ever fails, you know, what would keep you up at night about the job that you're doing? And maybe that'll help you get to the risks at the end.
Oh, and another good piece of advice too is sometimes you just have to be quiet. You have to let the silence sort of draw things out of the person that you're talking to, because people will talk when they're uncomfortable in silence.
That's such a good point. Yes, very much. Silence is okay. It's our friend sometimes, right? I love it. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. We'll see you again in the next module when we start talking about controls.
Sounds good. Thanks.